Welcome to Manage Your Damn Money with Ben and Malcolm, where we trade in personal finance advice for entertaining conversations about money and millennials. Welcome, world, to yet another episode of Manage Your Damn Money with Ben and Malcolm, where we love to have fun and entertaining conversations about money. Malcolm, my friend, how are you doing today?
Another day, another dollar, as you like to say. How about you?
I'm doing well, man. I'm doing well. I had a recent realization, sir.
Okay, tell us about it.
I don't know if you had this experience, but I finally realized why our parents, as kids, always seem to have on what may have appeared to me to be old clothes.
Oh, if you can make this make sense, then I'm all for it.
I finally realized, I now know that my kids, my wardrobe is forever going to be like 2019 or before.
Okay.
Because I'm at the point where I'm like, I don't need to buy anything for myself.
So the before kids era
absolutely
is the clothing
that's going to carry me through so long as I don't gain any crazy amount of weight. I remember this one time I went to the snow. I grew up in California. Mm-hmm. We went to the mountains to go to the snow. Okay.
Because I was going to add, like you said, we went to the snow, like that's a destination.
I had to back up.
Okay. We went to the rain yesterday. Okay. Anyway.
To get to the snow in Southern California, you have to go to the mountains.
Got it.
So we drove to the mountains, me and like a friend and my sister. And I remember distinctly looking at my dad's shoes. Because he had on some like old Converse sneakers. I'm like, why is this man in the snow with sneakers on? Like, this doesn't make any sense to me. And now, as a grown man with triplets and 3 extra mouths to feed, I finally understand.
Those Chuck Taylors to work.
I understand, Dad. So I'm sorry if I ever judged you. I never said this out loud.
That is hilarious.
Yeah. So that was my realization. Like, okay, that's cool. I'm not
going
to
So that's what fatherhood is.
Yes.
Never buying anything for yourself
just
ever again.
Complete self-denial at all times.
Then I got to get it out, because I was in Lowe's last night looking at ladders, and I was like trying my best to decide between do I really need this today for this ceiling fan that I've convinced myself that I'm going to put up soon?
You're going to install it.
Or should I? Oh yeah, I'm going to install it myself. Or should I just wait until I actually buy the ceiling fan and cross that bridge? So then I bought the ceiling fan so that I would have a reason to buy the ladder. So I would make a terrible dad in that sense, because nobody ate last night in that scenario. So it was just me. So I hope your realization is wrong.
Oh my God.
But we'll see. Not where you thought that conversation was going to go.
Sometimes these introductions take us to places that are just ridiculous and absurd. But I do want to remind you, you're watching or listening to Manage Your Damn Money with Ben and Malcolm, where today's conversation at hand is a very interesting one. We've been focusing on investing and things of that nature for quite a few of our most recent shows. This one is the inner workings of venture capital and funding an early stage startup. We actually have a guest for this show. She goes by the name of Maureen Marat Esq on the back of her name, which means she is a lawyer. And she is the founder of Crowdy Advisors, which is a startup and funding advisory firm. Malcolm, but before we get into that topic for today, as we do on every show, it is now time for headlines. The side income trap and the rise of the 4-income household. This was a June 2019 piece on moneytalksnews.com by Bob Sullivan. Bob says, the side hustle? It's a trap with the exclamation point. And if we're not
so dramatically.
and if we're not careful, we're going to end up with a new economic category, the 4-income household. In fact, we already might be there. A new Bankrate survey found that 45% of American workers say they have a side hustle. At the moment, 3 in 10 hustlers who have full-time work say they need their side job to pay for the basics. But as I read the numbers, it's worse than that. The other 2/3 say they use extra cash for savings or discretionary spending. But a generation or two ago, those categories were covered by middle-class jobs. The need for a side hustle to save money, that's not a hustle. It means that's their primary employment. Wages are depressed. The trap is this. Side hustle income is now being built into the cost of living, and we have been here before, Bob Sullivan says. Long before U.S. Senator Elizabeth Warren became a nationally known political figure, she wrote a book called The 2-Income Trap, which every American should read, he says. She notes this is often overlooked consequences of social change from the 1950s and 60s, where basically a middle-class life that once required only one income now requires two, which we...
Stop right there for a second.
Right.
A middle-class life that required one income. So we're talking 2 kids, a dad and a mom.
Maybe a dog.
A house with a white picket fence, at least 1 car, probably 2.
Yep.
Insurance for the whole family.
Uh-huh.
Also gas to put in that car and a chicken in every pot.
All those things.
Off one person's salary. We are so far from that, I can't even begin to calculate. Like,
and we know very well living here in the Washington, D.C. metro area.
I'm just talking about like Beaumont, Texas, right? Where like you still should be able to conceivably live like this.
Right.
Even there.
Right.
Like, so anyway, sorry.
No,
as you were.
It's cool. It's cool. I was right there with you.
But as you were saying that, I was just like, that is so far gone.
Oh, yeah,
like,
absolutely. Today, many families can't afford housing near good schools unless both parents work. For them, it's the cost of doing business or wanting to have a family. And Bob says he worries this is changing again. Side hustles are becoming, to use today's overused word, normalized. Hey, who doesn't like a hustle? America is becoming the land of small entrepreneurs. Now there's a million of them. It's great, but is it really? He asked the question. So Malcolm, I asked the question to you. What's your understanding of the rise of side hustles in our culture?
It's so complicated.
Okay.
Like we kind of touched on this just a little bit in one of our shows last season, where I was lamenting the fact that like people like teachers,
right,
who and maybe even nurses at hospitals and things like that, who could and should be at home recovering from the time they put in doing the thing they do, are now having to like drive Uber or deliver for DoorDash or whatever else you do as your quote unquote side hustle, which doesn't allow them the time to focus in on the thing that they primarily should be doing from 9 to 5. Like if you're my kid's teacher, I want your focus to be on teaching my kid. Not spending an extra 4 hours every night driving Uber to make ends meet because being a teacher doesn't pay you as much as it should in the area that you live in. So for me, it's very complicated in the sense that like, no, we don't necessarily need these side hustles. Employers should just pay people what it actually costs to live in the place that their company is. So if, again, I'm going to use Beaumont, Texas, and I hope nobody who listens to our show is going to email me their angry messages about Texas in general. But like, if you think about it, like a teacher who lives in Texas shouldn't get paid the same thing as a teacher who lives in DC, just based off of the cost of living. Exact same credentials, exact same experience level, all that kind of stuff. But the problem we have is like, if I can, I will. Kind of like Amazon with these fulfillment centers that they keep popping up everywhere. They're gonna pay the minimum amount they have to, and it's up to you to move to the place where that dollar goes more. But that shouldn't necessarily be to me, and that's part of the problem.
And that would be like wages not matching what the cost of living in the area is. And it's interesting we're talking about side hustles because I personally side hustled a little bit earlier in my career life, not like in kind of one of the more traditional thoughts of like Uber and stuff like that, but I had like actual like marketing and communications clients, and there was one that I carried into when I was like moved back into full-time work, and it got to the point where it was more work than it was worth in terms of the effort I was putting out, and it kind of didn't, the effort didn't match what I was getting out of it.
But a side job in your 20s, when you're like, you just finished undergrad, you just finished grad school, you're working your way through grad school.
It's no thing.
Sub 30, let's even just put a cap on it there, right? Like I bartended the first few years after I graduated college.
I did not know that, but go ahead.
I've lived, okay? So for me, it was like, I have all this free time. I have a job. I was working like, 50 hours a week at the time. And still, when I would go home, I'm like, I'm not doing anything. I should go make some more money. For that segment of your life,
it's cool.
That's perfectly fine. But like my last Lyft driver was like as old as my mom. And she was telling me that she had a full-time job. So my mom's old enough to be retired. And like this lady has a second job on top of the fact that she's working into her retirement years. That shouldn't be in this scenario that we're talking about. And I think the onus is probably somewhat on those employers to actually like come raise to the bar and pay your people like a livable wage.
Indeed. It's interesting because some of this entrepreneurship and the need for a side hustle is economic in nature, but there's also a cultural component. And we were talking about this before the show started. What a bit does it have to do, especially with millennials and Generation Z, about Instagram and social media that kind of hypes up entrepreneurship and side hustle and saying if you're not side hustling, you ain't doing nothing? Like, how much does that play a factor into it?
Secure the bag.
Secure the bag, right? Exactly.
That deep sigh was how I feel about Instagram. that sigh right there sums up how I feel about social media.
Right.
Like, it's there to show you the best of everybody's everything, but in reality, everybody's everything really isn't all that great a lot of times. And so the people that are like, oh, I got this side hustle going on, you can do it too, you should be like me, that kind of thing. When the camera is put down and, you log off, they go take their clothes off and lay back down in the bed where they were 2 minutes before they started that video.
Right.
And it's like, you're hyping, everybody's hyping each other up, and it becomes this echo chamber of lies and falsehoods, falsifications that just create nothing.
Right.
And so it's like, you've got these side hustlers, as the story calls them, that don't actually have any income from all this hustling that they're doing. Right. The hustle is me selling you this lifestyle that I'm living that, you decide you're going to aspire to and wear yourself out trying to keep up with the Joneses who don't even keep up with themselves.
Right. And when it comes to the going back to the side hustle thing a little bit more directly, when it comes to the need for extra income, for those especially, like you mentioned, that teacher who is, teaching and also going to drive Uber later, what can we attribute to that in economic factors? We've talked about this in a previous episode. Is it really that shareholder culture that pushes all profits towards the shareholders of companies?
Some. I think, especially for those who work for large, major corporations. Right. The corporation could pay you more. They could, kick in a little more and help out more, and they just choose not to because they don't have to, because the shareholders deem it more appropriate to give them as much as they possibly can. Right. But with that said, there are companies out there that I've come across who care more about their people than their peers do. Their peers being other companies that they compete with. And so they've made a commitment that we're not necessarily going to grow as fast as we possibly can, knowing that we're going to have more happy, productive, contributing members of society who work for us. And that's more important to us than making a whole bunch of dollars and dying with them clutched in our hands, when it's all said and done. And I think if there were more people who saw the world that way, then we wouldn't have as much of this problem, because we still would have some of it. Because frankly, there are the people who didn't prepare properly and aren't doing the things they need to be doing to take care of themselves, that do have to resort to things like side hustles and whatever else to make ends meet. But for the intents and purposes of this part of the conversation, I think the employers who decide to be a little bit more generous and take care of their people, if there was a little more of that, we wouldn't be having these kind of situations that we're discussing now.
Indeed, indeed. Well, I want to remind people you can always catch past episodes of Manage Your Damn Money on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play, and Spotify, and anywhere else where you may listen to podcasts. If you don't see us there on your platform, please send us a note at info@manageyourdamnmoney.com and let us know so we can try and rectify that situation. Of course, you can always catch us on social media, the place that we both loathe. My handle's at MYDM1. Malcolm, what's yours?
At Malcolm on Money.
And of course, you can catch us on Facebook, facebook.com/Manage Your Damn Money. This is MYDM with Ben and Malcolm. We will be right back. Welcome back to Manage Your Damn Money with Ben and Malcolm. Where on this episode, the conversation at hand is the inner workings of venture capital and funding an early stage startup. In the old days of American entrepreneurship, a business person only needed to settle on their business, open their doors, and start growing their business using the profits it created. But in the 21st century, raising money from wealthy investors sometimes seems like the only way to open a business. Here on Manage Your Damn Money, we've been on an investing-related topics binge, and in keeping with our craving, in this episode, we're covering the lesser-known, or should I say not always fully understood, world of venture capital and the funding of early-stage startups, Malcolm. So the first thing I guess we should define startups, as we do for a lot of our shows. A startup is a company that is in its first stage of operations. These companies are often initially bankrolled by their entrepreneurial founders as they attempt to capitalize on developing a product or service for which they believe there is a demand. And due to limited revenue or high cost, most of these small-scale operations are not sustainable in the long term without additional funding from venture capitalists, and that comes from Investopedia.com, Malcolm.
The interesting thing, though, is you can use the term startup for like 10 years and nobody will question you on it.
I feel like
Facebook has been a startup forever.
Not a conglomerate, like
Right.
what it really is now. That's hilarious. I feel like startup conceptually in the culture or in the space is a very nebulous, nondescript term
And I hate
at this
it.
point.
Like,
yeah.
startup has become the new nonprofit. Like, every time I turn, like around the time we graduated from college, every time I turned around, somebody was talking to me about their nonprofit they just started.
Okay.
And the nonprofit never did anything really. It never made any money. It never gave any money to anything. It was just a thing to walk around and hand out business cards talking about. Because, you know, in DC, like, if you don't have a business card, you're nobody.
Right.
So it just was that. And then now all of a sudden I turn around and I see those same people on Facebook, because I don't actually bump into them now. I see those same people on Facebook talking about their startup. And I'm like, you know, like, okay, so we traded in nonprofit, we started calling it startup, because that's the new it thing. So anyway.
Malcolm, you going somewhere, and I don't know if it's heavy. The first article we pulled for this is to address the difference between a startup and a regular old small business. This came from bplans.com, and it was by Candace Landau. The key difference, number one, between a startup and a regular old small business is how these entities think about growth. Startups are different from traditional businesses primarily because they are designed to grow fast. But by design, this means that they have something they can sell to a very large market. And for most businesses, this is not the case. Generally speaking, to operate a business, you don't need a big market. You just need a market, and you need to be able to reach and serve all those within your market. So think about like a convenience store that's in a neighborhood. The only people they're trying to reach are the people who are in or who pass through that neighborhood to sell to. That's the market. But for a new product like, you know, we'll say Uber, that product or the utility of that product has mass appeal. It can be used all the way around the world.
It's scalable.
It's scalable.
That Silicon Valleyers like
that
to
is the phrase.
Okay.
And that's the key difference between a regular business and a startup, at least as defined here. And then key difference number two, the relationship with the funding. Apart from having different ways of thinking about quote-unquote growth, startups seek financial investment differently than most small business operations. Startups tend to rely on capital that comes via angel investors or venture capital firms, while small business operators mainly rely on loans or grants, which is a lot different than how how like venture capital works. Mm-hmm. Malcolm, so what's been your understanding of what startups are? Like, you just kind of described it a little bit. Is there any more depth to, you know, kind of how you understand them now, you know, in your space and in your role as a financial advisor?
Well, I mean, I was joking and I was being facetious. There are people out there who I know personally who are like legitimately founding startups that do things.
Real ones.
There are some still that don't, but I won't dwell on that.
Right.
But like my understanding and appreciation of the world of startups is really this broader concept of, instead of attempting to climb your corporate ladder, I'm going to take my talents to South Beach, i.e. I'm going to go start up my own firm that does something similar or completely different, because I'm willing to bet on myself instead of working here for 40 years and hoping that it all works out in the end.
Right.
That to me is a very interesting concept that I feel like, you know, has been like a seismic shift in the work world, in the sense that folks continuously complain about, like, millennials don't want to stay at this employer for more than 3 or 4 years, and it's driving me crazy, and why should I invest in them, and blah, blah, blah. But part of the reason is because folks come in, they don't really see a path for themselves to get to the top, and they say, forget it, I'll start it myself, and that way I start at the top,
right.
and it begins and ends with me. And that concept has become more and more prevalent because we see so many people who are having success with it.
Right.
Not even necessarily Mark Zuckerberg or Jeff Bezos or whoever, but folks at a much smaller level who may be running like a 20-person operation.
Right.
Still, there's that like, I don't have to wait on you to give me permission. I'll just go do it myself.
Absolutely.
That is fascinating to me.
Absolutely. I have a question. Do you ever have clients that come to you about startups they're interested in investing in?
Some. Occasionally, I'll have a conversation with the client that, we'll get into this a little bit with our guests, but they're interested in getting in on what's called a friends and family round, where somebody that they know personally in their own orbit has come to them as a wealthy person they know personally and said, you know, I'm working on this idea, and for $25,000, you can own 10% of Ben Corp or whatever. I've had some of those conversations where people have asked me kind of like, poke holes in this for me, tell me why I shouldn't do this. You know, it's like, you know, my best friend's daughter has started this thing, and she's asked me to come in as a friends and family investor. And
what do you say?
It's interesting, but, you know, like.
What do you say to that?
I really will play devil's advocate and walk them all the way through, you know, all the reasons why it could and couldn't work, and then leave it up to them, right? Because ultimately it's their money to make the decision. I'm just there to help them figure out whether it'll bankrupt them or whether, you know, it'll be something that they can just, you know, if you lose this investment,
write it off.
How will that alter your life?
Right.
That whole thing is our conversation, but it's very interesting. But so there's this story that I heard from, I can't remember his first name, last name is Wozniak, the dude that co-founded Apple, where he was talking about Steve Wozniak, yeah. So he was talking about someone that they approached in the community in San Francisco and asked them to put in like $30,000 and he would own a third of Apple Computer.
Right.
At the time when they were still in like the garage trying to build the first Apple One.
Right.
And he passed.
Right.
So for $30,000, he could have owned a third
of
Apple, which is the first or second largest company in the world right now by market share.
Right.
And he passed. So when you think about those kind of scenarios, like in that friends and family round, you're like, man, like it could be the next Apple, but it could also be the next pets.com.
Right.
Like, how do I know?
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, another question we want to answer in this episode is, how do startups raise money? And to do this, we pulled one story that read, meet the first black woman to raise over $1 million in a secure token offering. This was an April 2019 piece on Forbes.com by Brittany Chambers. $1 million was raised from more than 2,100 investors and an oversubscribed waitlist with massive commitments. In the words of Dawn Dixon, when they don't give us a seat at the table, we bring our own, and bring her own is exactly what Dixon has done. Dixon, known for inspirational work as a serial entrepreneur, over the years has become notably popular recently for raising capital through crowdfunding. After founding a new endeavor like Popcom, Dixon highlights that black tech entrepreneurs often face difficulty raising money to launch and grow their companies, with the historical wealth of black families being nominally low compared to their more majority counterparts, and pattern matching often leaving black founders out. The venture funding landscape has traditionally been a major obstacle. After raising roughly $1 million from venture capitalists, Dixon endeavored to raise money through alternative means, which was the secure token offering, which we'll talk about later. It's also referred to as an STO. By 2020, STOs are estimated to grow up to $10 trillion as a global alternative for private equity and venture capital financing. STOs have provided investors with the opportunity to receive grants or dividends for voting power and a security token granted through the company's assets allocated as shares. Financial regulators consider them securities, which proved to be safe and solid investments for tokens as shareholders are given rights. Malcolm, have you ever heard of STOs before?
I have, and frankly, I'm a little bit concerned.
Okay.
Hopefully, our guest that's going to be on in a second will kind of tell me why I'm wrong.
Right.
But my big fear about this is, like, the whole design behind it was we want to make crowdfunding and, you know, early stage investing available to more people.
Right.
And make it more inclusive for everybody else and that sort of thing.
Right.
But traditionally, private equity has been a thing that, like, if you don't have a lot of money
right.
to lose.
Right.
you don't get a chance to get involved because you can't afford to lose money.
We're protecting you from yourself.
We're protecting you from yourself and the vultures out there.
Right.
So in this case, you're opening it up to more people who have never invested in this way before.
Right.
In some cases, this is people's first time ever investing
In anything.
in anything at all.
Right.
So for that, I'm a little bit concerned that now, like, you're not jumping in, when you get into a pool and you get 3 feet, 4 feet, 5 feet, 6 feet, like you're jumping in at 13 feet Olympic swimming pool and like expected to all of a sudden sink or swim.
Right.
And I'm worried that a lot more people are going to sink than swim. So we'll see.
And Dixon went on to say, by tokenizing our capitalization table, we now have a more flexible version of regular securities, and blockchain offers a unique and highly efficient medium for ownership and trading of digital tokens that can represent securities. And a real quick note, because we use the word capitalization, a capitalization table or a cap table is a table providing an analysis of a company's percentage of ownership, equity, and dilution, and the value of equity in each round of investment by founders, investments, and owners. It's interesting because the SDOs, to me, I didn't have that initial thought. I was like, oh, that seems like a relatively sensible way to like let people in, to have like little small shares broken up and you pay so much for each share. And
I
therefore,
always look at what can go wrong first.
That's your job as a financial planner. But our guest is going to help us get into the details of STOs and other business financing models. But the above is an example of an alternative financing for business that goes beyond a bank or a loan or raising money from venture capitalists. Malcolm, so generally speaking, though, what is your sense of the average person's understanding of the world of venture capital and finding ways to start up a business or just to fund the cost of a startup?
Low. I think the average person's understanding of this world is low.
I feel like
and I don't even mean that like as a pejorative or as a put down.
Right.
I don't mean that in any negative way.
Right.
I mean that like folks who invest in individual stocks, mutual funds, bonds, traditional things that we're used to talking about,
Right.
still on a scale of 1 to 10 are probably at like a 3.5.
Right. I would say
So when you throw in the mix something as complicated as a direct investment, which is simply put what this is called, you're directly investing in the enterprise instead of having some sort of intermediary or exchange like the New York Stock Exchange.
Right.
I just feel like people understand even less
Right.
what they're getting into, and it's way more the idea or the product or the concept or the founder or whatever is this sexy idea and concept, and it's all over social media and everybody's talking about it, and I want to get my $8 million at IPO like Beyonce did, and so I'm just going to jump in.
Right.
And it's like, okay, right idea.
Right.
I'm glad that you're interested, but like educate yourself a little bit more before jumping into the deep end, because it's like there's not a lot of room for error.
Right. Why, though, is venture capital so heavily attached to tech startups in particular? Like, why do those two things seem like in the news and everything we read, those two things go hand in hand? Venture capital has to go alongside with the development of a startup company that deals in some kind of tech.
Thank you for giving me a chance to show my inner nerd. So the way that venture capital got started in the first place is some of the very first folks in Silicon Valley who worked for, what's it called? Something semiconductor, like a Fairchild Semiconductor, way back when in the 50s and 60s, that actually like defected from these companies like Hewlett Packard, Intel, that sort of thing that they started themselves. They didn't have anything to do with the money they got when they sold those companies to IBM. And so they went out and started venturing into other people's businesses, putting up their own private capital to grow those businesses. 5 years later, take out a 10x profit and do it all over again. That whole concept started in Silicon Valley with these folks who are super into tech.
Right.
And so it's the business they understand, it's the business they stayed in, and then inertia just keep an object standing still, stays standing still. And that is all they know. So that's all they care about.
That's actually a really strong history there. And if people aren't in a position to secure financing for their business, what do they have to do? Like, what if you can't go out and raise venture capital funds or do an STO? What are you left to do?
Go get a job.
I was gonna say slow and steady. You could build the business.
Yeah, I mean that's that whole concept. People use the term bootstrapping, where basically you fund it yourself. You fund it with the limited means around you. Spike Lee shot his first, I think, 4 movies using credit cards and a few loans he could scratch together from people in his community. Like those things happen. They're possible. They're fewer and further in between, especially in this new culture where everything is like scale it as fast as you can, as big as you possibly can, or get out of the way because somebody else is going to take your seat at the table. Like how many businesses have been ruined by Facebook because Facebook came and said join or die. They said die, and Facebook said okay. You know what I mean? Like so, the reason Freudian slip, I was about to say Instagram, is because they bought them. Because Instagram was like, all right, cool, we'll get out of your way. But look at like Snapchat or Twitter is probably one of the next ones, on the table.
Twitter's hanging on though.
They are, but or what's another one? Flickr. Like all these companies that like Facebook has basically said join or die. That's what you're at the mercy of if you're out there going it alone and you don't have that war chest behind you that is venture capital, and you've got to just use whatever cash flow you can scratch together to do it yourself.
Right. Well, just a quick reminder, we are talking about the inner workings of venture capital and funding an early stage startup here on Manage Your Damn Money. I want to remind you, you can always catch past episodes of the show on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play, and Spotify. Simply search Manage Your Damn Money on any of those platforms. And of course, if you have a question that you want us to answer or a topic you want us to cover, send us an email, info@manageyourdamnmoney.com, and you can catch us on social media. My handle is @MYDM1. Malcolm, what's yours?
@MalcolmOnMoney.
And of course, that's on Instagram and Twitter. You can always catch us on Facebook, facebook.com/manageyourdamnmoney. This is MYDM with Ben and Malcolm. We will be right back. Welcome back to Manage Your Damn Money with Ben and Malcolm, where on this show we are talking about the inner workings of venture capital and funding an early stage startup. Today we are happy to have a guest who goes by the name of Maureen Marat Esq. She is the founder and owner of Crowdy Advisor, a startup and funding advisory firm. Maureen is a member of Cogent, a team of lawyers offering legal advice to businesses. She is also the founder and owner of Crowdy Advisors, as I mentioned before. And she helps local and foreign entrepreneurs and small businesses form entities, transact business, and obtain financing via equity, crowdfunding, and other alternative financing methods. Maureen, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
How are you doing today?
Good to hear. I'm good. I'm good. How about you?
Excellent, excellent. So real quick, tell us about who you are and what you do on a day-to-day basis.
Sure. So as you said, my name's Maureen Marat. I am an attorney, and so a lot of my work is with small businesses or startups, mainly startups. I know y'all how to think about startups. But so essentially these are people who are pre-revenue. They have a business idea, but it's not necessarily to the point where they might be actually able to sell something.
Right.
Or they might be selling something, but they need to get their documents in order. They need to form their corporation or LLC and get a tax ID number and operate at like a bona fide business. And then if they're past that stage, then that's when we get into talking about raising funds for your business, to grow your business, not just for the sake of raising funds.
Okay. Now, I know there's a lot of options when you become a lawyer to do things. You can do this path. You can make appearances on Law and Order. How'd you get into?
There's a lot in between.
Yeah.
I don't know. I thought if you're a lawyer, you're definitely going on SVU. But how did you enter the world of business financing and crowdsourcing and those kinds of things for startups? Like, tell us about that.
So it actually happened accidentally. I thought coming out of law school I was going to be a tax attorney.
Okay.
I took tax classes and I was ready to go, but I took a couple bar exams, and then after I was done with that, I realized I was too tired to go back to school and get a tax LLM. So, and one of the things I was going to do was help a friend of mine or a group of guys who were starting a crowdfunding business, because equity crowdfunding, the Jobs Act, that Title III, didn't come out till May 2016. And so I graduated in May 2016, actually I did. And so I was supposed to help them out. That startup didn't work out. And so I realized, I don't need y'all to do what I was gonna do for y'all, right? Because I was going to be the one helping with the documentation, submitting them to SEC and all that. So I was like, I could just do this on my own. And so in August of 2016, I just started Crowdy Advisors.
What a happy accident.
Yeah, and it actually turned out well, because then I would have been working for someone still.
Excellent. So what specific advice are people coming to you with to learn or understand when they come to Crowdy Advisors?
So most people come looking for funding,
Okay.
But I normally have to divert the conversation, because that shouldn't be, in my opinion, that shouldn't be the first thing you want to talk about. So often we talk about the structure of their business. So that's corporate governance. Who are the partners in this business? Do you have an operating agreement? Do you have a tax ID number? Are you paying taxes? You know, are you making any money? Right. What would you be offering your customers? Do you know who your customers are? And things like that. And then we move into actually raising funds.
Okay. And let's walk through the various ways really quickly of how you can fund a business. The first that we talked about, because you sent me a list of items and ways that you can fund a business. The first one is bootstrapping. This is like the first stage. I think about it in my mind. What's bootstrapping?
So bootstrapping is essentially gathering your own funds. So the founder or the people on the team putting their funds together to kind of get the business started, which could include registering your business and all that, but it could also include actually developing or creating whatever the product or the good or the service you're trying to provide. But essentially that money is coming from your pocket or from the team.
Collectively.
Collectively, yeah.
Okay, so if I understand correctly, and obviously this is me leading the witness a little bit,
Okay.
but if I understand correctly,
Right.
bootstrapping is essentially just me using my, as a side hustle, me using my paycheck to fund this thing to get it off the ground.
Yes, oftentimes that's where the money comes from.
So then what's the
paycheck.
next phase from there? Where do I go after I've exhausted my bootstraps? Where do I go next from there?
Well, it depends on what you've done, how successful or how efficient you were at bootstrapping, right?
Okay.
So some people are able to bootstrap in such a way that they can start actually selling something. Some people are able to bootstrap so that they're actually able to build something. Some people are able to bootstrap and nothing happens, right? It's just an expensive hobby.
Yeah.
So it can, I feel like it can go into these three buckets.
That's fair.
So obviously capital, as we like to say, is the best it's revenue is the best capital in the world. If you can sell something, then you've got it. When you go out to go and raise money, that's something you can show to your investors and to your customers. Like people like what we're offering. So after that, if some people aren't even able to bootstrap, but I think that if you're starting a business and you have an idea, there are some things you can do on your own that you don't have to go asking for.
And now, you mentioned moving from bootstrapping to raising money. Malcolm mentioned it earlier in the show. Talk about quickly the friends and family round. What is that about?
So, and I guess that would be the next step after bootstrapping, right? So you ask your friends and family or friends of friends, right, to invest in your business. And oftentimes, because they're investing, they get the best deal.
Okay.
So this is assuming
They
you
get
become
that. They get that third of Apple.
right for 30K, yeah,
Okay.
and then become multimillionaires in like less than 10 years.
Right,
You know.
okay.
So. And that's another hurdle because you have to convince your friends and family to invest. And I think sometimes those are the hardest investors to convince.
Right.
But so you get that investment from your friends and family, and you create the cap table, which delineates what percentage of the business or ownership interest that person has in the business. And I say they also get the best deal because at the time that they are investing, you're not worth much. So that if you make any money, if you make any revenue or anything like that, they're winning, pretty quickly. So that's a benefit if you have friends and family.
And is a cap table like a legal document? Well, can you quickly, what does that look like?
No, it's not a legal document. It's an internal document, but it's something that you should keep up with if you have investors.
It's a pie chart or a
yeah.
spreadsheet.
Yeah,
Who
most
do I
times
owe?
it's a spreadsheet. Yeah.
Who do I owe what?
Right. Right.
If this thing is successful,
Right.
who do I owe what?
Right.
Indeed. And then after friends and family, and this is where we start to hear about the stories
Right.
of those, startups that worked and were successful. Talk about Series A rounds of investing, and then B, C, D if needed. What are these? How do we understand the value of each series of investments after the friends and family round?
So, assuming you can get to a Series A round, funding round without friends and family, but it's kind of good to have that layered funding. So with Series A, essentially, you're still at the startup stage. Okay. You haven't necessarily, even though you're doing business and you have revenue, you might not have profits. So that's another thing we could talk about later. And so at that point, you are still giving the best deal to your investors because at that point, the value of your business doesn't really lie in what you're actually offering. It might lie in the technology, or it might lie in the potential services you can offer because you've done your market research and you know that this is my target audience, this is how much I can get from them, and this is why I'm better than my competitors. And that kind of helps shape your your A round. And then B, by the time you get to B, you should be making money. If you're not making money, you're probably not going to get to B. But if you are making money, that doesn't mean you have to go to B. There's no rule that says if you get money in your Series A round, you have to go to B, C, and D. You don't have to, but some people do, like the Ubers and the Lyfts of the world, because then, and even WeWork got their D round, right? And they're like in the billions, but they're not making any money.
Right.
So
I think there's a problem.
Right. So that's the other issue, but I think that only happens for companies like that. If you're an average business owner, you got to show that you're making some money to get to those rounds.
Okay.
So I know that a lot of times, like venture capital teams and firms tend to have their strategy as far as where they like to come into a deal. Like we're early stage investors, we're late stage investors, that sort of thing. But like from your perspective or your experience, why would I want to be a late stage investor? Because by then it's already been proven that this thing is going to be successful. So there's a lot less for me to buy. Like you said, you're very generous at the A round, and the friends and family even more so. But if I get to a C and a D, why do I want those shares versus the A?
So oftentimes the people who are investing in the C or D round probably invested in the A or B round, and they got a deal.
They double dipping.
Yeah, they're
They got
double
greedy.
dipping. And so that benefits them in multiple ways, right?
Okay.
But if you're a new person coming in on the back of end of a deal or a C or D round, it's probably because you know someone who's in on the deal as well. Oftentimes, the other thing is if they are investing in a late stage round, it's because something's about to happen and they can see their money, doubling, tripling 100 times quickly.
So they're going public in 2 years.
Yes,
so, okay.
exactly. And they can get out quick. They can be the first ones to get out. Even though they paid more because they're in the C or D round, they're going to make their money back in a short amount of time because they will go public or something like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, we've been talking about kind of funding through investment. What's the difference between funding through these kinds of investments and like maybe think grants or traditional bank loans? Like what's the difference between those?
So, with the banks and grants, you do still have to provide some documentation to show, what your business is, et cetera. I think with venture capitalists and that side of funding, I think it's very, it's not as objective as it would be with a bank or a grant. I think it's very subjective on that side. So, and we could talk about the numbers of how many people go into getting investing and how many people actually get it, regardless of gender, color, and all that. You know, it's a very small percentage. Whereas with bank loans, it's pretty much, have you been in business for 2 years? How much do you make? Did you file your taxes? It's very objective. If you don't meet those, those criteria, then you're just not going to get the loan. And the same thing with the grants. I think you have objective measures for that.
Okay. Now, I want to ask you, we kind of mentioned earlier these alternative ways of crowdfunding that we mentioned, specifically equity and debt crowdfunding, STOs and ICOs. What's ICO stand for? Initial coin offering?
Yes.
Okay, and an STO is a
security token offering.
security. So talk really quickly about both of those and what they are and how they're new ways to get investment into your business.
So an ICO, initial coin offering, is an unregulated way to raise money for your business. And that came on the back end of all these, the hype around blockchain projects, et cetera. And then STOs was like the new wave of ICOs, but with STOs, you're essentially admitting that what you're offering is a security, but you still want to say that it's a digital asset, right? So you add that layer to it. So oftentimes when someone is doing an STO, they're still going through SEC to register their offering, or they're still going through whatever other exemptions they might want to offer their securities, but they're still securities, right? There's no way around that. You could call it what you want, but yeah.
Okay. And when people are successful with raising money, be it in crowdfunding or be it in like raising investor capital, why are they successful in part? At least let's assume the business idea is great. Why are they successful otherwise? What are those other factors?
I think one reason why crowdfunding campaigns do really well is because they operate like a business. Because the crowdfunding campaign can feel like that's your business because you have to go out and get all these investors and all that. But if you think about what you're actually offering, how you're offering it, and why you're offering it, I think those things take you further than just, oh, I'm raising money, come to my platform, or come to the platform and give me money for equity. The other thing is, I think when we think about how we talk to people nowadays, we don't, I guess traditionally, if you were looking for investment, you would go fly to this place, go talk to this place, pitch them, you have 60 seconds, et cetera. But now you can do this all online. You can pitch, and it's so easy to get to people. Instagram and Twitter, you can choose the demographics, you can choose what city, state you want your ads to go to. You have that available that you didn't have before, and I think that helps reach people like never before.
So in the lead up to this part of the show, I started down the path of what my fears are in regard to opening up the ability to invest early stage in businesses via crowdfunding. My big concern, as I mentioned, is the fact that a lot of people who will be able to get in, because the minimum requirement in a lot of these cases is like $250, if I understand right? Like it's $1,070,000 divided by however many people equals $250. That's a lot of people who have never invested in anything before, and this is their first entree into the world of investing, period, and now it's venture capital. Can you convince me why I'm wrong, that I shouldn't be so fearful of all of the people who that's probably a mistake for them to jump right into it that far without really understanding things like what that 12-month lockup period really means, or what it means to be an investor in an early stage company versus one that's on a public exchange, all those kind of things?
I mean, I get your point, but I think what we also have to think about is how venture capitalism has been kind of, I guess the people who are in that group are kind of like elitists. I have this money, I can invest in these things, and if you make less than $200,000 a year, or you don't have $1 million in assets, you can't be part of this. When I am the customer, right? I am the customer that those companies are trying to reach. So why not be able to be part of the growth of that company, not just because I'm buying your product, but because I also believe in the product, or I also believe in the cause behind your product.
So for context, real quick, what you just described is what's called an accredited investor.
Yes.
An individual person who makes at least $200,000 a year in income and expects to get that same income for the next 2 years, or a couple who makes $300,000 or expects to see that same income for the next 2 years. or has $1 million in investable assets to their name already.
Yes, not including your home.
Right. So you're saying that that's exclusionary to say just these people who equal the top 5% or whatever of income earners in America. Why?
Because the person, again, the person that would be part of these different funding rounds are also in addition to being investors, they're also customers. Mm-hmm. So what's good about the SEC rules, good and bad, I guess, one is that even though they've lowered the threshold of how many people can invest, the issuer, so the company who is asking for the investment, they have a responsibility to help make their investors sophisticated, right? Because they consider them unsophisticated. So that means they have to make them sophisticated. And what they do is, on the platform, if you go on one of the major platforms, they have tabs explaining these are the terms, this is what you get, this is what you don't get, and this is why. This is what we're gonna do with the money. So very similar to what a person would give to a venture capitalist, but in an online, format, and easier
Click this radio button and you read the terms of the agreement.
Yes, and so and it's in a digestible format too,
Sure.
right? So, I don't know if you've seen a private placement memorandum for an accredited investor. It's 40 pages. They don't read that. But because they have so much money and they're sophisticated, it's okay.
Yeah. But to me, that's the crux of it, right? The fact that if you're a person who makes $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 a year, and you throw $5,000 at an idea, an investment, and it doesn't pan out and you go from $5,000 to $0, it doesn't really rock your world. Right. The same way that a person whose household income is $80,000, $100,000, if you lose $5,000 on this, it'll significantly change some things for you for the foreseeable future. And that's kind of my concern.
Well, there are thresholds for the SEC. Sorry, one last thing. So if you don't make over $107,000, you can't give more than $2,500, right? Or 5% of your income.
Sure.
If you make over $107,000, there's another threshold. So there are some parameters set in place, but I get what you're saying, but I think it gives people the opportunity to invest in things that they would want to invest in if they had the option.
Okay, so really quickly, should every person with an entrepreneurial dream be thinking about raising money?
No. I think they should be thinking about selling something.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's really simple answer.
Yeah.
Excellent. And then kind of stepping back, we're talking about the venture capital space in general. There's a lot, you kind of keyed into it a little bit earlier. There's a lot of talk about the lack of gender and racial diversity in those who get venture capital funding and startups and get meaningful funding to actually do something. What are your views on that challenge?
I think one of the challenges is, as has been alluded, is that when venture capitalism started, it started in Silicon Valley, and it was the same people. They look like each other and all that. I think over time it's evolved into maybe including more people, but I still think we have the people with the money, the people with the power still thinking that, this person doesn't necessarily look like me. I don't understand their target market. I don't understand their product, and I'm not going to go with this because I would prefer to go with someone else. And I think historically, they just, I'm using they very loosely, just don't think that people of color or women or black people have, I think, the wherewithal or the what's the word I'm looking for? Just to be able to pull it off. They don't feel like the chops, they don't feel like we can pull it off till we do, right? And then they're like, oh yes, we wanna have diversity and inclusion campaigns and things like that, where in the background it's not really happening that way. I think it's changing, but obviously we still have a ways to go. And women are the fastest growing group of entrepreneurs. So, but yet we're still, regardless of gender, we already know the gender, but regardless of, ethnic background, still the least supported in terms of entrepreneurship.
Okay. So final question before we wrap up. What should those who are in a serious position to consider raising money know about the prospect of knocking on doors to get investor-backed capital for their business?
What should they know? One, they should know their business, right? So I've definitely seen people who have had other people create their executive summaries and business plans for them, and then they can't speak to it. So that's crazy, right? If you have a deck, which is popular or common, then to be able to speak to that. But I think at the end of the day, if you focus on what you are offering and what you're trying to sell, then you can kind of make that work. So, and when I say that, I mean, if you are selling it to a specific demographic and you realize actually those things aren't being sold, nobody's buying them, then it gives you room to pivot and be flexible. And I think one of the things we're so caught up with is that we have this plan, it's perfect, and we have to do it this way. Right. And if we don't do it this way, we can't get it done. Right. But there's this saying, one of my friends says, sometimes being picky keeps you single. So to me, it's just like, it's the same thing, right?
Keeps you unfunded.
Right. Being picky or being very specific and not flexible keeps you unfunded.
Right.
So
you
flexibility.
seem to know a lot about this, Maureen. Okay. You should teach a class about this someday. I think that would be great.
Well, we already do.
Okay. Enlighten us.
It's called the Equity and Debt Crowdfunding Masterclass. So it's for issuers, so companies who are looking for funding, and we go through the different rules, these Securities and Exchange Commission rules and all that, and figuring out whether equity crowdfunding is something that you should actually go forward and do.
Okay.
We also have a workbook.
Okay. And if people want to find you and learn more about your work and what you do, or want some help with what their raising money prospects are, where can they find you?
My Twitter and Instagram, I'm at Crowdy Advisors, so CROWDIE Advisors. And then I also have a Facebook page, Crowdy Advisors.
Okay, excellent. Well, Maureen, thank you for coming on the show to enlighten us about the kind of murky world of venture capital and crowdfunding and those things. I don't feel like we've had that discussion before, Malcolm.
I don't think so either.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well,
we've never figured out like a fun, interesting way to talk about it until now, so.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, we want to thank our listeners and those who are watching the show as a TV show for tuning in for this episode. As always, you can catch past episodes of the show on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play, and Spotify. And of course, please leave us a review on any of those platforms. If you have a subject you want us to cover, send it to us, info@manageyourdamnmoney.com. You can always catch us on social media. My handle is MYDM1. Malcolm, what's yours?
At Malcolm on Money.
And that's on Instagram and Twitter. And of course, you can catch us on Facebook, facebook.com/manageyourdamnmoney. Of course, thanks to our partners here at Montgomery Community Media for yet another amazing show. Thank you, Maureen, for coming on.
Thank you.
Until next time, peace.
Peace.